The dry Montana wind whipped Hannah Lawson's hair across her face, stinging her cheeks like tiny needles. It did nothing to hide the shame burning her skin. Below her, on the dusty main street of Silver Rock, the entire town watched. Her baby, Thomas, whimpered in her arms, his small body hot with fever. The gavel cracked. "We have the widow Lawson," the auctioneer bellowed, "indentured to the highest bidder to pay the debts of her late husband." A man laughed. Then, from the back of the crowd, a low voice cut through the air. "I'll take them." The town of Silver Rock, Montana, was carved from rock and spite. It was a hard place for hard people, a place where the silver vein had run deep, but men's loyalties ran shallow. On this blisteringly cold Tuesday, the town's capacity for cruelty was on full display. Hannah Lawson stood on a makeshift platform, 3 whiskey barrels with a few planks laid across them, in front of the Silver Nugget Saloon. She was 24, but the last 2 months had carved the lines of 44 into her face. Her dress, once a respectable blue gingham, was faded and patched. In her arms, she clutched the only thing she had left in the world, her 6-month-old son, Thomas. The baby was sick. His breathing was a shallow rasp, his skin flush with a fever she couldn't break. She had no money for medicine, no food to offer. She had nothing. Her husband, Frank Lawson, was dead. Bartholomew Bart Shaw saw to that. Shaw owned the saloon. He owned the bank. He owned the mining supply store, and, by extension, he owned the sheriff. Frank had been a partner in a small independent mine, but Shaw held the note on his equipment. When Frank died in a collapse Hannah was sure was no accident. Shaw had come calling. He didn't just want the mine. He wanted the small ranch Frank had built for her, the one with the creek and the cottonwood trees. Shaw had produced a ledger showing Frank was $5,000 in debt to him. It was an impossible sum, a fabrication. Frank had been meticulous. He wasn't a debtor. But Frank was in the ground, and Bart Shaw's ledger was the only one that mattered. When Hannah refused to sign the ranch over, Shaw had invoked a cruel, archaic territorial law, an indebtedness auction. He wasn't selling her. He was selling her labor. He was selling her into indentured servitude, her and her child, to whoever would pay Frank's debt. The winner would also get the deed to the ranch, free and clear. "Let's start the bidding," shouted Jedediah Pryor, the town's weaselly auctioneer, who worked for Shaw. "Who will give me $100 for this fine woman's labor? She can cook, she can clean, and she's got a strong back. The babe comes with her, of course. 100! The crowd was mostly silent. Some men stared with open lust. Some women watched with a mixture of pity and superiority. No one would help. To bid against Shaw was to invite his wrath. $100! Pryor yelled again, his voice cracking. "Surely she's worth that. A 5-year indenture, and the ranch land. It's a bargain." Bart Shaw, a large man in a clean pinstripe suit, watched from the saloon's covered porch, a cigarillo in his teeth. He smiled. This wasn't about the money. This was about power. It was about showing Silver Rock what happened when someone said no to him. He was going to let the bidding fail, then bid $10 himself and own her completely. $50? Pryor pleaded, sweating now. 20? Someone? Anyone? Hannah squeezed her eyes shut, pulling Thomas closer. The baby let out a thin, painful cry. "Forgive me, Frank," she thought, a single tear cutting a clean path through the grime on her cheek. $10, Shaw said, his voice booming across the street. "I'll bid $10 for the lot." Pryor looked relieved. $10 from Mr. Shaw. Do I hear 11? Going once? $5,000. The voice was not loud, but it had the density of a boulder dropping onto a steel plate. It cut through the murmuring crowd, the wind, and Jedediah Pryor's whining. Pryor froze, his gavel halfway in the air. "Well, what was that?" A man stepped out from the shadow of the livery stable. He was tall, dressed in dusty trail clothes, denim trousers, a worn leather duster, and a low-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. He didn't look like a ranch hand. His boots were fine leather, and the revolver on his hip was a custom-grip Colt, not a standard issue. He walked slowly toward the platform, the jingle of his spurs the only sound on the street. He stopped 10 feet from the platform, pushing his hat back just enough to reveal sharp, ice-blue eyes. He looked at Hannah, then at the baby, and finally, his gaze settled on Bart Shaw, as cold as a mountain winter. "I said," the stranger repeated, his voice calm and clear, $5,000, in cash, for the widow and her baby. The silence that fell over Silver Rock was absolute. Jaws hung open. Jedediah Pryor's face went pale, his eyes darting to Bart Shaw, who had frozen with his cigarillo halfway to his mouth. $5,000. It wasn't a bid, it was an execution. It was the exact, impossible sum Shaw had claimed. The stranger hadn't come to barter. He had come to end the auction. Hannah stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't recognize him. He was a complete stranger. Yet he looked at her with an intensity that was almost familiar. He wasn't looking at her like the other men, with hunger or pity. He was looking at her with recognition. Bart Shaw finally moved. He dropped his cigarillo, grinding it into the boardwalk with his heel. "Now hold on just a damn minute," Shaw growled, stepping off the porch. "Who in the hell are you? You think you can ride into my town and—" "The name is Gideon Cole," the stranger said, not taking his eyes off Shaw. "And I believe this is an open auction. Or is your territorial law only for show?" Shaw's face purpled. "You don't have $5,000. Gideon Cole slowly unbuttoned his duster. He wasn't reaching for his gun. He reached inside his vest and pulled out a thick, oilskin-wrapped package. He tossed it onto the platform at Jedediah Pryor's feet. It landed with a heavy metallic thud. Pryor, shaking, bent down and fumbled with the ties. He peeled back the oilskin. Inside were stacks of U.S. gold double eagle coins and thick bundles of greenbacks from a San Francisco bank. "Count it," Gideon ordered. Pryor's hands trembled as he riffled through the money. His eyes went wide. It's all here, Mr. Shaw. It's 5,000. Maybe more." "Then the debt is paid," Gideon Cole stated. He turned his gaze back to the auctioneer. "Or are you waiting for another bid, Mr. Pryor?" Pryor looked like he was about to be sick. He looked at Shaw, who was vibrating with a rage so profound he couldn't speak. "Going once," Pryor whispered, his voice barely audible. "Going twice." He swallowed, his eyes fixed on Shaw, who gave a nearly invisible, furious shake of his head. Pryor ignored it. He was terrified of Shaw, but he was more terrified of the man in the duster. "Sold. To Mr. Gideon Cole. For $5,000. Pryor slammed the gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the still street. Gideon Cole didn't smile. He didn't look triumphant. He simply walked to the platform, ignoring Shaw and the stunned crowd, and held up his arms to Hannah. Hannah flinched. She had been bought. Her servitude had simply been transferred from a man she knew to be a monster to a man she didn't know at all. What would he demand of her? "Ma'am," Gideon said, his voice softer now, all the ice gone, replaced with a weary kindness. "It's over. You're free. You and the boy. I'm not buying your indenture. I'm paying the debt." Hannah couldn't process the words. I don't understand." "You don't need to. Not right now. He nodded to her son. That baby is sick. Let's get him to a doctor. He helped her down from the platform. Her legs were weak, and she stumbled, leaning against his strength for just a second. He was solid as an oak. He guided her, one hand on her back, creating a barrier between her and the gawking townspeople. As they passed Bart Shaw, the large man hissed, "This ain't over, stranger. You just bought yourself a whole heap of trouble." Gideon Cole paused. He didn't turn his head, but he spoke low and clear. "You have no idea what you just sold, Mr. Shaw, but you're about to find out." He guided Hannah across the street, past the Silver Nugget, toward the small office of Doc Elias. The entire town of Silver Rock watched them go, silent, knowing that something fundamental had just shifted in their town. The iron grip of Bartholomew Shaw had, for the first time, been broken. Doc Elias was an old man who had seen too much and said too little. He was one of the few men in Silver Rock not directly on Shaw's payroll, surviving on a meager barter system and a quiet integrity. He took one look at baby Thomas, his face grim. "Lung fever," he pronounced, after listening to the baby's chest. "He's badly dehydrated. It's good you brought him in. A few more hours." Hannah's breath hitched. She hadn't realized how close she had come to losing him. 2. Gideon Cole placed a gold coin on the table. "Whatever he needs, Doctor. Whatever it takes." Doc Elias looked at the coin, then at Gideon. "This will cover it. And then some, son." He turned to Hannah. "He'll need to stay. I need to get broth into him, and I have some quinine. You should stay too, Mrs. Lawson. You look half dead yourself." Hannah wouldn't leave the baby's side. Gideon rented the small, clean room attached to the doctor's office. He had food brought in from the hotel, beef stew and fresh bread. Hannah hadn't eaten in 2 days, but she forced herself to, for Thomas's sake. For hours Gideon sat in a wooden chair in the corner of the room, his hat in his lap, saying nothing. He just watched, a silent guardian. Hannah was torn between overwhelming gratitude and profound suspicion. "Why?" she finally whispered, after the baby had taken some broth and fallen into a restless, but more natural, sleep. Gideon looked up. His face was weathered, his eyes holding a deep sadness she hadn't seen on the street. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice cracking. That was everything. Who are you?" Gideon ran a hand over his face. "I told you. My name is Gideon Cole." He paused, searching for the words. I was a friend of your husband's. I knew Frank." Hannah's head snapped up. "You knew Frank?" "A long time ago. Before this." He leaned forward. "I knew Frank Lawson back in California. We were partners. We got lucky. We had a claim near Sutter's Mill, one everyone else had passed over. We worked it for 2 years and pulled a fortune from that cold ground." Hannah was stunned. Frank had never spoken of a fortune. He had arrived in Montana with a modest stake, enough to buy the land and the basic equipment. "We split it down the middle," Gideon continued, his voice nostalgic. "Frank, he didn't care about the gold. He just wanted land. He wanted a ranch, a family. He said he was heading north, maybe Montana or Wyoming, to find a place that wasn't picked over and crowded. I liked the prospecting. I kept looking. We shook hands and parted ways. That was 6 years ago." 6 years? Hannah breathed. "He never mentioned you. He never mentioned a fortune." "He wouldn't," Gideon said with a sad smile. That was frank, humble. He wouldn't want to show up in a new town flashing gold, attracting the wrong kind. He'd want to build it himself, start fresh. The money was just a tool. Then, the debt was a lie, Gideon said, his voice hardening. Frank Lawson would never have been $5,000 in debt to a man like Bart Shaw. If anything, it was the other way around. How did you find me? Find us? I've been less fortunate in the last few years, Gideon admitted. My luck ran dry. I decided to hang up my pickaxe and find my old friend. I wanted to see that ranch he was always dreaming about. Maybe invest, settle down. I sent a letter to a land office in Helena asking about a Frank Lawson. They sent word back. Silver Rock. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town that had nearly destroyed her. I rode in 2 days ago. I kept quiet, listened. I heard whispers about Frank's accident. I heard about the widow Shaw was taken care of. I was trying to figure out what was happening when I saw them drag those barrels into the street this morning. His fists clenched. I was too late to save Frank. I wasn't going to be too late to save his wife and his son. Hannah finally broke. The dam of terror and grief she had held back for 2 months burst. She covered her face and wept, not the silent, shamed tears from the auction block, but racking, painful sobs of relief and loss. Gideon didn't move to comfort her. He gave her the dignity of her grief. He simply stood as a sentinel, his presence a silent promise. When she finally quieted, her breathing ragged, she looked at him. "Mr. Shaw, he won't let this go," she said. "He's a monster. He killed Frank. I know he did." "Yes," Gideon said, his voice flat and dangerous. "He did. He'll come for you. He'll come for us. He'll say that money was, I don't know, fake. He'll have the sheriff arrest you." "Let him try," Gideon said. And for the first time, Hannah saw the man beneath the dusty cowboy. He wasn't just a prospector. There was a precision to his words, a cold intelligence in his eyes. "I didn't spend my entire share, Mrs. Lawson. I'm a partner in a shipping line in San Francisco, and I own a controlling interest in a bank in Denver. I'm not a millionaire cowboy, as some might say. I'm just a man with resources." He turned from the window. "Bart Shaw thinks he's a king in this little pond. He doesn't know what kind of shark just swam in." News of the auction spread through Silver Rock like a wildfire. Gideon Cole wasn't just a name, he was a legend by sundown. The man who had faced down Bart Shaw and hadn't even blinked. Shaw, for his part, was in a black rage. He was in his office above the Silver Nugget, shattering whiskey glasses against the wall. Sheriff Brody, a man with a stained vest and a weak chin, flinched with every crash. "Who is he?" Shaw roared, slamming his meaty fist on his oak desk. "Find out. I want his horse lame, his pockets empty, and his body dumped in the same mine shaft as Lawson." "Bart, I asked around," Brody stammered. "He rode in on a thoroughbred, not a Mustang. His saddlebags are new. He paid Doc Elias with a $20 gold piece for a bottle of quinine. He's not some drifter." "I don't care if he's President Grant," Shaw spat. "He humiliated me. In my own town. He took the Lawson woman. He paid the debt, which means that ranch is now legally hers." And that was the real problem. Shaw hadn't just wanted the land for its grazing. Frank Lawson's ranch bordered the high pass, the only discreet way to move certain goods from the north without passing a territorial checkpoint. Frank had discovered Shaw's real business, not mining, but smuggling. Rustled cattle, illegal rifles to renegade tribes, opium from the coast. Frank was going to expose him. The accident had been a necessity. Now, with the debt paid, the ranch deed was no longer tied to Shaw's bank. It was free and clear, and it was in the hands of Frank's widow, who was being protected by a man who was clearly dangerous. "Fix it, Brody," Shaw ordered. "Find a reason. Vagrancy, public nuisance, carrying a concealed weapon. I don't care. Get him in a cell." He hasn't done anything illegal, Bart. He paid a public debt. Shaw stared at the sheriff until the smaller man wilted. Then make him do something illegal. I have men. You have a badge. Get it done. Tonight. That evening, Gideon left Doc Elias's office to get some air. He had been cooped up for hours, watching Hannah sleep in the chair by the baby's cot. He stepped onto the boardwalk, the cold night air a welcome shock. The street was empty. Too empty. He saw them. 3 shadows detaching themselves from the alleyway across the street. They were Shaw's men. Thugs, not gunmen. They were carrying clubs, not pistols. Shaw wanted a beating, not a shootout that would bring the marshals. "That's him!" one of them growled. "Mr. Shaw wants a word." They fanned out, blocking his path. "I'm not interested in talking," Gideon said, his hand hovering near his hip. "He ain't interested in talking neither." The lead thug snarled and lunged, swinging his club. Gideon wasn't a brawler. He was a fighter. He moved with a speed that belied his size. He didn't step back. He stepped in. He deflected the club with his forearm, the sound of wood hitting bone echoing on the street, and drove the heel of his other hand straight into the man's nose. There was a wet, crunching sound, and the man went down, screaming. The other 2 paused, shocked. Gideon didn't wait. He was on them. He grabbed the second man's wrist, twisted it, and used the man's own momentum to slam him face first into the horse trough. The third man, seeing his friends dispatched in under 5 seconds, dropped his club and tried to run. Gideon was faster. He tackled the man, dragged him to his feet, and slammed him against the wall of the livery. "Message for Mr. Shaw," Gideon said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You send your dogs after me again. I'm putting them down." He punctuated the statement by slamming the man's head against the wood, hard enough to daze him, but not knock him out. He let the man slump to the ground. He checked his own forearm. It would be bruised, but not broken. He adjusted his duster and walked calmly back to the doctor's office, leaving the 3 men groaning in the dirt. From the window of the saloon, Sheriff Brody and Bart Shaw watched the whole thing. Brody was ashen. "My God, Bart. He's not just rich. He's fast. He took out the Miller brothers like they were children." Shaw wasn't angry anymore. He was cold. He was calculating. "So he's not a dog to be put down. He's a snake." He turned away from the window. "Fine. You want to clear out a snake? You don't send dogs. You burn the whole nest." He looked at Brody. "You're going to get a warrant." "Arson." "Arson!" Brody yelped. "On what grounds?" "My supply store. The back room. It's going to catch fire tonight. A terrible, tragic accident. And a witness, one of my boys, is going to say they saw Gideon Cole running from the scene. Get him in a cell. Once he's locked up, he's mine. The woman and the baby will be collateral." The next morning, baby Thomas's fever had broken. He was weak, but he was nursing. Hannah looked at Gideon, her eyes filled with a new light. It wasn't just gratitude, it was resolve. "He tried, didn't he?" she asked quietly. Gideon was standing by the window, his bruised forearm hidden by his sleeve. "He sent some men." "Are you—" "I'm fine, they're not." He turned to her. "We can't stay here. Doc Elias is a good man, but he's not a fortress. Shaw will try again. He'll use the law next." "The ranch," Hannah said. "We have to go to the ranch. Is it safe?" "It's ours," she said, the word tasting strange and powerful. "Frank. He built a small cellar for storage, but he built it with a hidden compartment. He was always private. He kept his important papers there. If Shaw's debt was a lie, Frank would have proof. It was a risk. Shaw would be watching the road, but staying in town was a bigger one." Gideon nodded. "Get the baby ready. I'll get a wagon. We leave in 10 minutes. He bought a buckboard and 2 stout horses from the livery, paying in cash, which made the owner nervous but compliant. He loaded in the few supplies they had. Doc Elias gave Hannah a bottle of quinine and a bag of dried herbs. "Godspeed, Mrs. Lawson," he said, pointedly not looking at Gideon. They rode out of Silver Rock under the hard glare of the morning sun. No one stopped them. Gideon could feel the eyes on his back. Shaw was letting them go. He wanted them at the ranch. He wanted them cornered. The ranch was 5 miles out of town, nestled in a small valley Frank had called Hannah's Hollow. It was beautiful. A small, sturdy cabin sat by a running creek, but the beauty was marred. "He's been here," Hannah said, her voice tight. The cabin door was ajar, hanging off one hinge. Inside, the place was destroyed. Furniture was overturned, the flour and sugar dumped on the floor, Hannah's few dresses slashed and thrown in the hearth. "He was looking for something," Gideon said, his eyes sweeping the room. "The ledger," Hannah breathed. "Frank's business ledger. He wrote everything down." She went to the hearth. It was cold. She pushed aside the ruined dresses and, with Gideon's help, pulled up the heavy stone slab that formed the base. Underneath was a small, dusty opening, the hidden compartment Frank had built. "He didn't find it," she whispered. She reached inside and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. They sat on the overturned settee, baby Thomas sleeping in his basket, as Hannah opened the book. It started simply. Records of land purchase, cattle, feed, tools. And then it changed. June 14th, met with B. Shaw. He proposed a partnership. He provides access to his shipping network for my cattle. I provide discreet passage through the valley. June 20th. Shaw's wagon came through. It was not cattle, it was rifles. Winchester 73s by the crate, headed for the Northern Territories. This is illegal. July 1st. Frank's handwriting was shakier now. I confronted Shaw. He laughed. He said I was already an accomplice. He showed me his ledger. He's been cooking the books, framing our partnership as a series of loans from him to me. He's been building a false debt against my name since the day we met. July 10th. He's smuggling opium now, using my creek to hide the wagons. He says if I talk, his ledger is the only one the law will believe. He says I'm trapped. Then, the final entry, the one that made Hannah's blood run cold. July 15th. I found his real ledger, hidden in his office. He's not just a smuggler, he's a killer. He has a man on his payroll, a mining expert. He's planning— No, I can't write it. I'm riding to Helena to see the U.S. Marshal. I'm taking this book. I have to warn. The entry stopped. That was the day Frank died. He was going to expose him, Hannah said, her hand over her mouth. He was on his way to the Marshal when Shaw's mining expert. "Rigged the mine," Gideon finished, his voice like granite. "He lured Frank there, maybe on the pretense of a new silver strike, and then murdered him." He stood and looked out the broken door. "This book is Frank's testimony, but it's your word against Shaw's, and in this town, his word is law." "Then what do we do?" Hannah asked, clutching the ledger to her chest. "We change the law," Gideon said. "Shaw made one mistake. He assumed I was just a drift-by. He doesn't know my connections." He looked at Hannah. "I need to get to the telegraph office in Helena. It's a 2-day ride, hard. I can't take you and the baby." "You're leaving?" Panic seized her. "I'm not abandoning you," he said firmly. "I'm going to get the cavalry. Barricade the door. There's a rifle Frank kept, isn't there?" She nodded. "Above the mantel. Keep it loaded. Don't open the door for anyone but me. I'll be back. I promise you, Hannah, I'll be back." The silence that fell after Gideon rode out was heavier and more terrifying than any sound. He had taken the high pass, the smuggler's route, pushing his horse at a punishing pace. He knew he was riding against two clocks, the one ticking down on Hannah's safety, and the one counting down to Shaw's discovery of his arson charge. He'd left Hannah with a firm promise. "Barricade the door. Keep the rifle loaded. I will be back." Hannah watched him disappear over the ridge, a lone rider against the vast, indifferent sky. For a long moment, she felt the old, cold panic rise in her throat. She was alone. Truly alone. Then she looked down at Thomas, asleep in his basket, his tiny face peaceful for the first time in weeks. The panic receded, replaced by something hard and cold. Anger. "He's not taking you," she whispered. "He's not taking anything else." She was no longer just a victim to be auctioned. She was a mother, and this was her land. Frank's land. She went to work. Her first act was to wedge the splintered cabin door shut. It was weak, the hinge hanging loose. She dragged the heavy oak dining table, one of the few things Shaw's men had only overturned, not shattered, and braced it against the door. She added the matching benches, creating a solid, heavy barricade. It wouldn't hold forever, but it wouldn't be easy. Next, she found Frank's rifle. It was a Winchester .73, resting on wooden pegs above the cold mantel. She pulled it down, the feel of the oiled wood and cold steel a strange comfort. Frank had insisted she learn to shoot when they first arrived. "This is wild country, Hannah," he'd said, his smile kind. "A woman should know how to protect her home." She had hated the noise, the kick of the stock against her shoulder. Now she blessed him for his foresight. She found the box of cartridges in the small pantry, tucked away on the top shelf. Her hands trembled, but she forced them steady, feeding the brass-cased cartridges one by one into the rifle's side gate. Click, click, click. Each sound was a small punctuation mark, a commitment. She loaded it until it would take no more, then laid it on the small cot, the baby's basket at her feet. She checked the windows, pushing the heavy wooden shutters closed and dropping the bars, plunging the cabin into a dim, dusty twilight. She was now in a fortress, a small, wooden fortress, but hers. And then she waited. The first day was a lesson in psychological torture. The silence of the hollow was absolute, broken only by the creek's gurgle and the occasional cry of a hawk. Every gust of wind that rattled the shutters was, for a heart-stopping second, a footstep. Every creak of the cooling cabin timbers was the sound of a man testing the door. She ate nothing, her stomach a tight knot. She nursed Thomas, humming to him, her voice the only human sound in the dark. The second day was worse. The isolation began to wear on her. Doubt crept in. Had Gideon made it? Or had Shaw's men found him? Was he lying in a ditch somewhere between here and Helena? Was this all for nothing? She fought the despair, pacing the small, dark space, the heavy rifle becoming an extension of her arm. She would peek through a tiny crack in a shutter, scanning the valley until her eyes burned, seeing nothing but empty land. On the morning of the third day, she was rocking Thomas by the cold hearth when she heard it. It wasn't a creak, it wasn't the wind. It was the rhythmic, unmistakable sound of horses. Not one, but many. Her heart leapt into her throat. She gently placed Thomas back in the basket, tucking a blanket around him, and grabbed the Winchester. She moved to the front window shutter, easing it open just a fraction of an inch. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't Gideon. It was Bart Shaw, sitting high on his big black stallion, looking as arrogant as he had on the saloon porch, and with him, flanking him, were Sheriff Brody and at least 10 other men. They were all armed, a small, private army. A posse. "Hannah Lawson," Sheriff Brody's voice rang out, thin and straining to sound official. "You are harboring a federal fugitive. Gideon Cole is wanted for the arson of Mr. Shaw's supply store 3 nights ago. We have a warrant for his arrest, and yours for aiding him. Open this door in the name of the law." Arson. The trap. Gideon had been right. They hadn't just come for her. They were setting a legal snare for him. The law, her supposed protector, was riding with the murderer. Hannah's fear, the cold, paralyzing dread, burned away, leaving only white-hot rage. She pressed her cheek to the rifle stock, her voice shaking but carrying clear. "He's not here, Sheriff, and you know as well as I do he didn't burn anything." "Stubborn," she heard Shaw's voice boom, laced with impatience. "Just like her husband. She's lying. She's got the ledger in there. Brody, your warrant gives you leave to break down that door. She's obstructing justice." "Now, Bart," Brody said nervously, his horse shifting. "She's a woman. With a babe. She's an accomplice," Shaw roared, his mask of civility gone. "And she's sitting on my property. Get that door down. I want that book." There it was. He didn't care about Gideon. He didn't care about the arson. He knew they had found Frank's ledger. "Do it," Shaw commanded. 2 of his biggest thugs dismounted. They looked around, spotted the woodpile near the side of the cabin, and hefted a thick, heavy log between them. They walked to the door, took a stance, and rammed it. Wham! The entire cabin shook. A cup fell from a shelf and shattered. Thomas let out a terrified wail. Wham! The door's splintered wood groaned. The heavy oak table behind it scraped and jumped on the floorboards, but it held. "Again! Harder!" Shaw bellowed. Hannah moved, her mind clear and cold. She left the window, bracing herself near the center of the room, the rifle aimed squarely at the doorway. Wham! Crack! The door buckled. The top hinge tore free from the frame. Wham! With a final explosive crash, the door and the heavy table barricade burst inward, skidding across the floor in a cloud of dust and splinters. For a second, there was silence. Then, 2 of Shaw's men, pistols drawn, rushed into the opening, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. Crack! Hannah fired. The sound was deafening in the small space, the smell of gunpowder instantly filling the air. The first man screamed, a high, thin sound, as the bullet tore through his shoulder. He spun around, clutching the wound, and staggered back out of the doorway, collapsing in the dirt. The second man, his face a mask of shock, dove for cover outside. "She's armed! Damn it, she's armed!" he yelled. "Damn her!" Shaw screamed, his voice pitching high with fury. "Don't just stand there! She can't shoot all of you! Fire into the cabin! Smoke her out! I don't care how you do it! Just get that book!" The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from a dozen rifles and pistols. Bullets tore through the thin wooden walls, ripping through the flour sacks, shattering the windows. The sound was a deafening, continuous roar. Splinters of wood filled the air like hornets. Frank's belongings, her belongings, were being shredded, destroyed. Hannah grabbed the baby's basket and crawled on her belly, dragging it behind her. She scrambled into the safest place she could think of. The deep hearth, its thick chimney stones, offering the only real protection. She curled her body around the basket, holding her hand over Thomas's mouth to muffle his terrified screams. "Give it up, Lawson!" Shaw's voice yelled over the din. "It's just a matter of time. Give me the book and I'll let you and the boy live. I swear it." Hannah squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering. He was lying. He was the man who had murdered her husband, who had put her on an auction block. "Liar!" she screamed back, her voice raw with terror and hate. "Murderer!" She risked a peek around the chimney stone. She saw one of the men trying to circle around to the broken side window, trying to get a better angle. She raised the Winchester, steadied it on the stone, and fired again. Crack! The bullet kicked up dirt just at his feet, and he scrambled back, cursing. She was pinned. She was trapped. More! Shaw commanded, his voice a feral snarl. Light it up! I want that cabin torn apart! The volley became intense, a hailstorm of lead. The walls were splintering, daylight showing through dozens of new holes. Hannah covered her son with her own body, bracing for the bullet that would find them. She was going to die here. She had failed. She prayed, not for herself, but for her son, and for Gideon. Gideon, please, forgive me. Hold your fire! The voice was not Shaw's. It was new, a deep, powerful bellow that cut through the chaos like a cannon shot. The gunfire stopped. The sudden silence was as shocking as the noise had been. Hannah's ears rang. I said, hold your fire! Hannah, shaking, risked a look out the shattered front window. On the ridge above the hollow, the same ridge Gideon had disappeared over 3 days ago, were 7 riders. They were silhouetted against the bright morning sky, an image of pure, terrible judgment. They wore the dark blue coats and bright gold badges of the United States Marshals, and at their lead, on his dusty thoroughbred, his face like carved granite, was Gideon Cole. Shaw's men stared, their weapons lowered. Shaw himself looked up, his jaw dropping, his face going from red rage to a sickly, pale disbelief. Bartholomew Shaw, one of the marshals, a broad-shouldered man with a heavy grey moustache and eyes like steel chips, yelled, his voice echoing across the valley. You and your men will drop your weapons. You are under arrest by the authority of the United States Territorial Court. For a moment, all of Silver Rock's power, Shaw, Brody, and their thugs, was frozen. Shaw was the first to break. His mind, trapped and cornered, snapped. It's a trick, he screamed, his voice cracking. There's only 7 of them. Kill them! Kill them all! Shaw drew his own revolver and fired a wild, panicked shot at the ridge. It was a fatal mistake. The men on the ridge were not a sheriff's posse. They were federal lawmen, veterans of 100 such standoffs. Fire! The lead marshal commanded. The marshals didn't return a wild volley. They fired with disciplined precision. Their rifles cracked, and Shaw's disorganized, exposed men began to fall. One clutched his chest. Another dropped his rifle and ran, only to be brought down. Sheriff Brody threw his gun down and put his hands in the air, screaming, I'm the law! I'm the law! Don't shoot! Gideon wasn't firing. He was already moving, his heels dug into his horse's flanks, charging down the hill, his eyes locked on the cabin. He didn't care about the fight. He cared about what was inside. Shaw saw him coming. He saw his men defeated, his power evaporating in smoke. He turned and ran. Not for his horse, not for freedom, but for the one thing that had caused all this. The ledger. He burst through the shattered doorway just as Hannah was pushing herself up from the hearth, the rifle in one hand, the baby's basket in the other. He saw the ledger, its leather cover sticking out of a satchel at her feet. Give me that, he snarled, and lunged, his face a mask of sweat and fury. He grabbed for the satchel. Hannah, acting on a final, primal surge of defiance, swung the heavy Winchester like a club. The solid wood stock connected with Shaw's jaw with a sickening thud. He stumbled back, stunned, a tooth flying from his bloody mouth. At that exact moment, Gideon filled the doorway, his duster flying, his Colt in his hand, his eyes blazing. Shaw looked from the furious widow to the avenging cowboy. He was trapped, defeated. He let out a wordless, animalistic roar and charged Gideon, his last, desperate act. Gideon didn't fire. He was not a killer, not like Shaw. He was a protector. He stepped aside from the clumsy charge, grabbed the back of Shaw's expensive suit coat, and used the man's own momentum against him, pivoting and throwing the larger man clean out of the cabin. Shaw sailed through the air, landing hard in the mud, face down, sputtering and broken, at the feet of the lead U.S. Marshal, who had just dismounted. Gideon Cole stood in the doorway, the smoking rifle in Hannah's hand, the crying baby at her feet. He holstered his Colt and looked at the Marshal, his breathing heavy. "Marshal Vance," Gideon said, his voice cold and steady. "This is Mr. Bartholomew Shaw. I believe you have a warrant for his arrest." Marshal Vance dismounted, his boots landing with a heavy final thud in the mud. He nudged Shaw's sputtering form with his toe. "Get up." Shaw rolled over, a pathetic monster unmasked. His expensive pinstripe suit was a ruin of mud and filth, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle, blood and spittle leaking from his mouth. The look of absolute power he had worn like a crown was gone, replaced by a vacant, animalistic panic. "Bartholomew Shaw," Vance said, his voice void of all emotion as he pulled a set of heavy irons from his belt. "You are under arrest by the authority of the United States Territorial Court. You stand charged with the murder of Frank Lawson, conspiracy to defraud, illegal smuggling of firearms, and a list of other federal crimes the governor was very interested to hear about." Two deputies, their faces grim, hauled the whimpering Shaw to his feet. The metallic click of the iron snapping shut was the loudest sound in the valley, a period on an era of terror. Just then, Sheriff Brody, who had been frozen in disbelief, threw his gun to the ground and ran forward, his hands held high. Marshal Vance, thank God you're here," he cried, his voice a desperate, oily whine. "This man, Shaw, he's a devil. He's been terrorizing this town for years. I was just biding my time, working to expose him from the inside. I'm the law here." Gideon Cole stepped out of the cabin's shattered threshold. Hannah was right behind him, her small frame shielded by his, her knuckles white as she clutched the leather-bound ledger to her chest. "That's a lie," Gideon said, his voice cold and cutting. The Marshal turned, his attention shifting to Gideon. "Marshal, this is Sheriff Brody. He wasn't biding his time, he was taking his cut. He was Shaw's accomplice. He led this illegal siege on Mrs. Lawson's private property. He's the one who issued a false warrant for my arrest for an arson he knew Shaw committed." Marshal Vance looked at Brody with a slow, burning contempt that was more terrifying than any rage. "We know who you are, Sheriff," Vance said flatly. "Your name was prominent in Mr. Cole's wire. The governor's order for arrests includes you." He nodded to a third deputy. "Arrest this man for complicity, corruption, and impersonating a lawman. Because you, sir, are a disgrace to the badge." "No, you can't!" Brody shrieked, his facade of authority crumbling into pure cowardice. He tried to scramble away, but the deputy grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. "I'm the law! I'm the law!" "Not anymore," Vance said curtly, as the second set of irons clicked shut. The remaining of Shaw's men, seeing their leaders in chains, offered no resistance. They dropped their rifles and pistols, hands in the air, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. Their loyalty had been bought with money and fear, and both had just evaporated. Hannah, her body still trembling from the adrenaline of the fight, took a shaky step forward. She held out the leather-bound book to the Marshal. This was my husband's," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He died trying to get this to you. It's his testimony. It's the proof." Marshal Vance removed his hat, a gesture of profound respect. He took the ledger from her gently. "Mrs. Lawson, on behalf of the territory of Montana, I am truly sorry for your loss. Your husband was a brave man. This book," he said, holding it up, will ensure that Bartholomew Shaw hangs and that his entire network is torn out by the roots." He turned to Gideon, placing his hat back on his head. "Your wire to the governor in Helena was compelling, Mr. Cole. I've never seen an executive order for a full-scale federal intervention come through that fast." The governor wasn't aware his old friend and primary partner from the Denver First National Bank was riding the Montana Territory. Gideon gave a slight nod, his face still hard from the confrontation. "The governor and I have business. Yes. I'm just glad you got here in time. Mrs. Lawson and her son?" He trailed off, his gaze going back to the bullet-riddled cabin. "So are we, Mr. Cole," Vance said grimly. "We'll clean up this mess. My men will take these prisoners back to Helena for federal trial. This town is under territorial authority until the governor can appoint a new, real sheriff." As the marshals began the grim work of securing the prisoners and tending to the wounded, the people of Silver Rock began to appear. They crept out of their homes and businesses, drawn by the gunfire and then the silence. They walked up the road to the ranch, their faces pale. They saw Shaw, broken and in irons. They saw Brody, weeping openly. They saw the reign of terror end, not with a whisper, but with the slam of a federal iron. One woman, Mrs. Gable, who ran the dry goods store, stepped forward and approached Hannah. We were too scared, Mrs. Lawson," she said, her hands twisting in her apron. He owned everything. We're sorry. For what he did to you. For the auction." Hannah looked at the woman and at the other silent, shamed faces. She saw no victors here, only survivors. She gave a single, tired nod of acknowledgement. Gideon stepped forward, his presence a clear boundary. "Mrs. Lawson needs rest," he said, his voice quiet but firm, and the small crowd respectfully dissipated, heading back to town to process the sudden, violent change in their reality. Within an hour, the marshals were gone. They had taken Shaw, Brody, and their entire gang, leaving 3 deputies behind to maintain order in the town. And then there was silence. The hollow, which had rung with gunfire, was now filled only with the sound of the wind whistling through the new holes in the cabin. The adrenaline faded, leaving Hannah weak case-kneed. She looked at the wreckage of her home. The door was gone, the furniture splintered, her few possessions destroyed. It was a total violation. She finally broke, slumping against the doorframe, a dry sob catching in her throat. Baby Thomas, having miraculously slept through the worst of the gunfire, now began to cry, sensing his mother's distress. Gideon was at her side in an instant, not touching her, but just there. "It's over, Hannah," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "He's gone. You're safe." "He took everything," she whispered, tears tracking through the grime on her face. "Frank, this house. He took it all." Gideon walked past her into the ruined cabin. He picked up the baby's basket, checked on Thomas, and then gently handed him to Hannah. The baby immediately quieted in her arms. "He didn't take this," Gideon said, his voice firm. "And he didn't take the land. This is just wood." He looked at her, his ice-blue eyes holding a new, unfamiliar warmth. "I promised I'd come back for Frank's family. I'm not leaving you here." Hannah looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a stranger, a savior, or a fighter, but just as a man. A good, solid man. The marshal, he said, "You're a banker, a partner to the governor." A small, weary smile touched Gideon's lips. "I am, or I was. I got tired of sitting in offices. I came looking for my old friend to see if he'd found what he was looking for." He looked around the valley. He did. "What will you do now, Gideon?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Your resources aren't needed anymore." "I think they are," he said. He crouched down and picked up a piece of the shattered rocking chair. "I told you I was a partner in a bank. I'm also a partner in a lumber mill in Oregon. I know how to build." He met her gaze. "We can rebuild this, Hannah. Better than before. Stronger." Gideon Cole did not leave Silver Rock. The $5,000 in gold and cash he had thrown at the auctioneer's feet was quietly donated to Doc Elias, funding a proper clinic for the town. He used his own money. He sent wires to Helena and Denver. Within a week, wagons rolled into Silver Rock, not with guns or opium, but with fresh-cut lumber, glass for windows, new furniture, and a dozen hired carpenters and stonemasons from out of state, men who had no fear of Shaw's ghost. He didn't just rebuild the cabin. He built a ranch house, one worthy of the valley, with a deep stone foundation and a wide, covered porch. He hired honest ranch hands and bought the finest cattle from Texas, his name and credit opening doors that had always been sealed to Frank. He and Hannah worked side by side. She was not his housekeeper, she was his partner. She had Frank's ledger, and she knew the land. She directed the planting, the layout of the new barn, the mending of the fences. The townsfolk, seeing the ranch rise from its own ashes, began to call it the Phoenix. But to Hannah and Gideon, it was just home. The whispers in town about the widow and the millionaire cowboy faded, replaced by a deep and abiding respect. Months later, the fall air was crisp, smelling of pine and curing hay. Gideon stood on the new porch, watching the sun set, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple. The sound of a hammer was, blessedly, gone. The door opened, and Hannah came out. She handed him a cup of hot coffee. Thomas, now a healthy, laughing baby, was on Gideon's hip, his small hand fisted in Gideon's shirt. "Frank would have loved this," Hannah said quietly, looking out at the new fences and the healthy cattle grazing by the creek. "This is what he dreamed of." "Yes, he would have," Gideon agreed. He looked at her, at the way the fading light caught the auburn in her hair. The lines of terror and grief had been replaced by a quiet strength. He always did have good taste. In land. He paused, turning to face her. And in family. He shifted Thomas into the crook of one arm and, very gently, put his other arm around Hannah's waist. It was not a gesture of possession, but of protection, of partnership. Hannah, who had stood alone for so long, finally leaned into his strength, resting her head on his shoulder. Together they watched the future they had bought, a future built not just on gold, but on courage, loyalty, and the promise of a new beginning. What a journey. A story of how quickly a life can be shattered by greed, and how one person's courage can be the spark that brings a tyrant to justice. Hannah and Gideon, brought together by tragedy, proved that the darkest night can be broken by a single, determined light. They didn't just save themselves, they saved an entire town. But this kind of story, where the powerful are held accountable and the innocent are rescued, isn't just history. It's a reminder of what we all hope for in the world today. If this story of justice in the Wild West moved you, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the good guys really win. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that bell so you never miss another story of karma, justice, and incredible real-life drama. Thank you for listening.